I'm so happy that we finally have a new game that's worth a dedicated benchmarking video. As you can tell from the title, today we're going to be benchmarking the brand new Wolfenstein Youngblood with a ton of budget graphics cards. Let's get into it. Hey, welcome to Zach's Tech Turf. Today we're going to be benchmarking the new Wolfenstein game with 8 budget graphics cards, and if you don't care about my introduction of these graphics cards or talking about my benchmarking method, then I will have timestamps down in the video description. And if you're new here and you want to see more PC building or more benchmarking videos, then hit that subscribe button down below and also that notification bell. That way you never miss an episode. But before we get into it, let me quickly pay some bills. Today's video is brought to you by Pulseway, which is a really neat remote monitoring and management software that I've actually deployed across my entire network down here in my studio. Pulseway is an all-in-one network management platform that allows you to remotely monitor and even control all of your devices that you installed the lightweight client on, which by the way, pretty much every operating system is supported. I personally really like the phone application because it allows me to quickly see what's going on with all of my devices, such as their temperatures, what processes are running, and I can even run scripts and perform Windows updates no matter where I'm at in the world. For us PC gamers, this is perfect because it allows us to start up those lengthy Windows updates while we're away, so we know our gaming rigs are 100% good to go when we get home. There's also pages and pages of notification settings to configure so you can get all sorts of alerts from your devices. Head on down to the first link in the description to score yourself a free version account which supports up to 2 devices, or use discount code ZTT to save 2 months off your next subscription. Alright, so for today's testing, I have 8 budget graphics cards, and these are the same ones that I've been using in a ton of other benchmarking videos, so let's make this short and sweet. For the AMD side of things, we have the RX 460, RX 570, and the RX 480, and over on the NVIDIA side, we have a GTX 750 Ti, which I will phase out here soon. We also have the GTX 960, GTX 970, GTX 1050 Ti, and finally the GTX 1060. All of these graphics cards are actually sitting at a pretty decent price on the used market right now. You can find any of these cards for less than $100 if you find a somewhat decent deal, and I just happen to have all of these down here in the studio at the time of making this video, so that's why I chose these specifically. For our testing platform, today we're using a Ryzen 5 1600, and I think that this is a good balance of what we should use when testing these budget graphics cards. I actually just uploaded a video featuring the first generation Ryzen 5 processor, and we determined in that video that you can actually find that CPU at a steal of a price, especially since the brand new Ryzen 3000 series CPUs launched, so I think that CPU just makes sense with these budget graphics cards. Also inside our testing rig is 16GB of Corsair Vengeance RGB RAM clocked at 3200 MHz. The game is installed on a 120GB AirI SSD, and the motherboard we're using is a Gigabyte B450M, which is also towards the budget end for price. Yes, this is the exact same build that I just featured in my $600 gaming PC build guide that I uploaded last week. Booting into the actual game finally, here's what the video settings page is looking like. For today's testing, we're going to be sticking to 1080p, full screen mode, and vertical sync off. Up at the top, you can see the video quality profile, which is your presets. Changing this will change all of the settings here in the advanced settings tab to whatever you choose. Keep in mind that you can definitely tweak these to get the absolute best bang for your buck and most optimized performance, but for the sake of testing, I'll only be changing the preset. As far as the actual benchmarking run goes, right when you drop into the game, there's a pretty decent level with a good amount of textures, moving parts, and most importantly, consistency. I started my benchmarking run for every single card right when you load in, and then ended it once I killed everybody in the level, which is around 8 to 10 people, so it was a decent amount of action. Instead of showing that specific benchmarking run for each individual card in the video, that would obviously be super boring. Instead, I'll show you gameplay footage of me progressing through the story with all of these cards, but just know that I did go back to this benchmarking run for all of the GPUs. Alright, so with all that out of the way, it's now time for the actual benchmarking results, and first I'm going to show you a chart with every single graphics card running the exact same settings, 1080p and medium, and that way you can see how these cards stack up side by side. And then after that, I'm going to show you the settings that I would use for each of these cards specifically and what results I got, and just know that I was shooting for around 60 FPS for that. So here's the chart with all of the cards running the same settings, 1080p and medium like I said. As you can see, our super low-end GTX 750 Ti definitely cannot handle this game in 1080p, and then up towards the high end, we see that the cards with 8GB of VRAM are definitely looking pretty good, as the RX 570 and RX 480 got well above 100 FPS. Other than the 750 Ti though, every card is at least playable in 1080p in medium, which is definitely a pretty good sign. For our first benchmarking run with each card, we have the AMD RX 460, and for this one I actually kept the settings at 1080p in medium because that got us just under our target 60 FPS mark at 55. If you do want to get over that hump, then you can obviously drop it down to low settings. Next up was the RX 570, and for this one you definitely do not have to drop the settings. In fact, I actually had to bring them up to max quality, and still in 1080p I averaged 94 frames per second, which is great to see, and you can see here that the game looked pretty nice. For our last AMD card, I used the RX 480. Sorry, I still don't have a 580 in the studio yet, and once again in 1080p and max settings we got pretty much the same results as the 570. This game is running buttery smooth with these high VRAM AMD GPUs for sure. Transitioning over to our NVIDIA cards, starting with the lower end GTX 1050 Ti, this was the only card that I had to drop the resolution down to 720p, and with low settings I averaged right on the money at 60 FPS. After that was the GTX 960 with 2GB of VRAM, and in 1080p and medium settings, aka the chart settings that we used earlier, I averaged 57 frames per second. The bigger brother GTX 970 was up next. I actually made a dedicated video about this one because the 970 is providing so much value here in 2019, and in 1080p and ultra settings I averaged 57. I did try to get this one to max settings because it should be competing with something like the RX 570, but I believe the limited amount of VRAM is what kept it at ultra. After that I tested the GTX 1050 Ti, and in 1080p and medium settings once again I averaged 67 frames per second, and I wouldn't recommend going up too high because this looked great and felt buttery smooth here. And finally our last card for the day is the 3GB GTX 1060, and in 1080p I could only get the settings too high because of the amount of VRAM, and with that I averaged 91 FPS. I did indeed try to get to ultra like I did with the 970, but it was chugging at like 30 FPS, so I won't go any higher than high for this card. So as you can see, Wolfenstein Youngblood is running extremely well on these three AMD GPUs, and it's definitely favoring the high amount of VRAM in the RX 570 and RX 480. The good news though for NVIDIA owners is that this game can still run with any of these cards we tested with today at 60 FPS, provided you drop it down to 720p for the 750 Ti. So overall this game is actually pretty optimized and ready to go right out of the box. Well, that wraps up my benchmarking run for Wolfenstein Youngblood with 8 budget graphics cards. As always, drop a comment down below about what you thought of these results, or feel free to share your own results because maybe you can help someone else out. And after that, feel free to head on over to one of these two videos if you haven't seen them yet, and definitely hit that subscribe button because coming up next, we're testing out some new hardware. You definitely do not want to miss that video.